Everyone is very upset your picture's reversed. What was that? They're all upset the picture's reversed with the name showing.
I know. I knew that people would notice it in this crowd.
I love this crowd.
It's so that you can see the name in a rear view mirror.
All right, if everyone wouldn't mind grabbing seats again, it's about that time.
And then there's a pointer, maybe.
Everything else.
And we're just waiting on a couple more. John Edgington, who I think most of us all know and love, was supposed to do this introduction today, but unfortunately he was not able to be here. So I'm going to step in and do my best. And thankfully he did send us a lovely write-up. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to read what John had to offer. So we're super excited to welcome Captain Sarah Armour for her talk on the rebuilding and the stewardship of the schooner Brilliant. In John's words, who knows her very, very well, we're privileged to welcome Captain Sarah Armour as our guest speaker today. As captain of the 1932 Sparkman and Stevens schooner Brilliant, Sarah directs the oldest operating civilian sail training program in the United States. Sarah's tall ship career began at age 15 aboard the Hudson River sloop Clearwater, a fitting start since both her parents were involved with that program. Her first schooner was the Mystic Whaler, where she served with distinction before joining Baltimore's Living Classrooms Foundation aboard the schooner Lady Maryland. After a few years, Sarah sailed aboard the Pride of Baltimore II for several voyages, including the Great Lakes Tall Ships Challenge. She's now in her 5th year aboard Brilliant. While captaining Brilliant is a full-time, all-consuming role, Sarah maintains an excellent work-life balance by also serving on the boards of Tall Ships America and the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. It is a testament to the quality of Brilliant's program that since the schooner arrived at Mystic Seaport in 1953, Sarah is only the 7th captain to command her in over 73 years. And it is a testament to Harry Nevins' exceptional construction that the Brilliant sailed for 93 years before requiring any structural replacement. And it is to Brilliant's benefit that when that work finally became necessary, it was Sarah Armour who oversaw that major project. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Sarah Armour.
That there, this here. Oh my God, hold on. There's a lot of things to hold. Okay, thank you so much, Mary Kay and John. Maybe if I stand, nope. Okay, I'll be over here. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for having me here. I was reflecting on sort of the first time I found out about American Schooner Association. It was a schooner rendezvous on Block Island, and I was a deckhand on the Mystic Whaler. And it was also the first time I saw Brilliant, and I was very much a kid off the farm, being like, what the heck is that? And Nick Alley showed me around and made a lot of jokes about how he was yachting now. And it was just so clear that him and all of these people at this great event were schooner people, right? And I wanted to be that. So it means a lot to be here. I told John when he asked me to do this that it was a little intimidating. This is obviously a very discerning crowd. And so I really look forward to sharing about this project, and particularly sharing this project as an operator, right? Not a shipwright, not a carpenter, just somebody trying to kind of put the pieces together and put the people together on this project. So that'll work. Last winter, we, as was sort of alluded to earlier, we took on what would be the largest and most invasive project that the vessel has seen. And I'm gonna just interrupt for a moment. I just have notes on this and I'm gonna need to see them. So I wonder if we can move the table over. Maybe that way. How does that work for people? Can you all sort of see? Okay, thank you. I appreciate the flexibility. Okay, so we took on a pretty sizable project, and I would love to chat about catalyst for that, and then sort of our expectations, and then all the ways that we blew our expectations up and increased scope and increased timeline, all the things that you folks who spend time with boats would probably have been able to predict. And so I'll also chat a little bit about the background of the vessel, and then some of our sort of, we'll call it philosophy of stewardship. Many things that I think will resonate with this group. So just some origins from the vessel. This is a photo that's a little grainy, I fear, on the wall, but it's a photo of her construction. This is 1931 in the Henry B. Nevins yard. She was launched in 1932, it was an Olin Stevens design. He was 24 when he drew her, which I find crazy, but love that. It was only his 12th design, and he wasn't really much of a schooner guy, right? He really loved a yawl, and he sort of begrudgingly drew Brilliant as a schooner because Walter Barnum wanted a schooner. He was the gentleman that had the vessel commissioned, and by all accounts was quite an exacting fellow. He wanted a robust, ocean-going, cruising schooner that could withstand pretty sizable force. He was confident that Henry Nevins and Olin Stevens would create a vessel that would be able to be knocked down and come up with the rig intact. He wanted the vessel to be able to do a 360-degree roll. You were allowed to lose the rig in that instance, but you did have to come up with deck fittings, hatches, and so forth, still intact. I don't know what I should point out. There we go. This is just more construction photographs that I just didn't want to skip because they're really lovely. But if we are discerning about the timeline, this vessel was built sort of at the height of the Great Depression. 1932 was not a time when we were churning out luxury yachts. The Nevins yard hadn't seen an order in more than a year when the Brilliant call came through. The anecdote that I have heard, actually first and foremost from John Edgington, was that Henry Nevins was essentially having people paint the bathrooms and build shelves in the stockroom just to keep this group of craftsmen employed, so that when or if or whenever the economy turned back up, he wouldn't have lost his whole workforce. When the order came for Brilliant, Henry famously told his crew to empty the vault, and what he was referring to was a pile of tropical hardwood that was saved for returning vessels to get cosmetic work done. They did not expect to make it past this build. They thought that this would be the last job that they had. And as such, it was pretty commonly held that everybody working on this boat really milked it, right? They took as long as they could to build this boat, and it served the boat very well. These are just some gorgeous photos from that first year of sailing. So she would set a transatlantic record in 1933, sailing between Nantucket Lightship and Bishop Rock in England. She was, to a discerning eye, you'll see that she has a gaff-rigged main, which is how she sailed for the first 2 or so decades. I included the photo on the right because the jackyard topsail is dreamy to look at. I haven't really seen many other photos of Brilliant sailing with that, but that was 1933, and it's just a treat. You'll see on the left, she has a yard. So she had a deck set split course, which was, I don't have anything like that now, but would be neat, although maybe a little bangy. Brilliant was owned by the gentleman and the family that commissioned the vessel for about a decade. And like many of these boats joined the picket fleet of anti-submarine patrolling in World War II. So she worked out of St. Simons, Georgia, and evidently spotted one submarine before being post-war bought by Briggs Cunningham, who maybe some of you know, sorry about that, a go-fast guy in both cars and boats, who famously was an America's Cup skipper. He owned Brilliant and did his best to make Brilliant, this was the late 40s and early 50s, a contemporary ocean-going racing vessel. He expanded the rig, heightened the rig pretty extensively, and did his best to sort of make her competitive in a world venue. That was not so successful. She's very heavily built. We love her as a cruiser. We do race her from time to time, but she's a big girl. And so he wasn't totally successful in this, but at that time, he found himself sailing in Long Island Sound for fun with the kids from his yacht club. So this was the late 40s and the early 50s, and he started taking junior sailors out from Pequot Yacht Club. And this was where his like little idea came that Brilliant would be an excellent sail training platform. We occasionally find reason to go to Pequot Yacht Club, and it's nice to sort of explore that history. The last time I was there, a gentleman who was up in years came down to the boat, and he said that he was one of those kids who went out on Brilliant as part of the junior sailing program. And I was so excited to hear about what sail training looked like in 1949 or whatever year. And he said that, well, we went out sailing and we brought our sandwiches and we drank our soda. And when we were done with our soda, we threw the cans and then we shot the cans with a shotgun. And I thought, that sounds pretty cool. And he said, don't worry, it was safe because only the adults were allowed to shoot the cans. So anyway, Briggs Cunningham donated the vessel to Mystic Seaport Museum with this express purpose that we would be taking young people sailing and introducing them to what it means to voyage on a vessel like this. And so this is Brilliant in 1953 at her dock on Seagull Point, or Scott's Wharf, as it's sometimes called, which is the place that she's sitting right now under winter cover. So our program is a little different. We don't shoot soda cans with firearms these days, but we do still sail with teens. So our bread and butter is that we sail 5 and 10 day voyages with 15 to 18-year-olds as the crew. Brilliant is dual certified as both a sailing school vessel and a subchapter T small passenger vessel. And we spend most of our time doing overnight voyages under that sailing school vessel designation. We sail with a really limited professional crew, myself, a mate, and a deckhand who's kind enough to cook for us with either help or hindrance from me and the rest of the crew. We're really lucky to spend time on this boat. We sail in the spring and fall with adults mostly, doing classic yacht racing and some voyaging, occasional day sails throughout the spring and the fall. I don't know how to not put these two photos in every slideshow that we do. So on the right side is George Moffett, who famously drove Brilliant for 2.5 decades with 2 Mariner Girl Scouts who are pulling a fisherman up before the tack. This is 1985. And then on the left side is the entire ship's company smushed out on the bowsprit after Vineyard Cup with a bunch of teens a couple years ago. They had a great showing, and I like to brag about them whenever we can. The winter time is, I think, where we can really give some credit where credit is due. Brilliant has a long history of careful, thoughtful, forward-thinking maintenance, and I inherited that strategy. I feel tremendously grateful that we have the time and the resources to throw at, frankly, varnish. It was mentioned that I'm the 7th captain, but part of that captain sticking around for a while has done so well for the boat, and I benefit tremendously from that, and the boat benefits from that. In these photos, it's mostly our volunteers. We have an amazing core of volunteers who come in for 1 or 2 full days a week and have been doing so for far longer than I've been with the boat. I think Jim, who's in the picture on the right, has been I think this is season 14, winter 14 for him. And so the boat would not look the way she looks right now if we didn't have that kind of focus and that kind of effort. Every year on an annual cadence, we pull the rig. Every year we cover the boat. Every year we, do a block party like everybody does and pull our turnbuckles apart and try to really be thoughtful. We joke that we go down to 40 hours a week, but it's a nice 40 hours a week, and we spend a lot of time in a heated shop with music. Despite nearing our 100th birthday, we're almost there. We have only done this one big rebuild, and so we're looking forward to sharing it. Okay, so let's talk about the thing that started it all. Brilliant, for many years, probably the last 15 or so, the folks at Mystic Seaport Museum, Sector Long Island Sound, and a couple of sort of like advisory shipwrights have monitored delignification in frame heels below the engine. So what I'm talking about here is this like unicorn fur situation that looks pretty icky, particularly when you get a good look at it, which we could rarely do. This is long thought to be due to stray current, likely when the vessel was bonded, which is frankly, decades ago. This has been monitored by, as I said, our team and then the folks at the Coast Guard. Along with a couple of other sort of known structural red flags, we've been watching this. The other ones that I want to just mention is that Brilliant is the frames are steam bent. I believe this was the largest boat that Nevins steam bent frames for, and at least 2 of them were cracked. The cracks, as far as I can tell from the Sharpie marks on them, have been monitored deliberately since about 2009, and that was very transparent with the Coast Guard as well. In the spring of 2023, the Coast Guard, I think, sort of ran out. I don't want to say ran out of patience, but they sort of said it's time to figure out a solution for these delignified frames and for these 2 cracked frames. They gave us a long timeline for this, which I am grateful for. And they basically said, come to us with a proposal to fix this, do it right, take your time. And so that's what we started figuring out how to do. Now, I want to just go back to some historic photos really quick, because this will show you the stack of structure that we had to dismantle in order to get to frame heels under the engine. So you can see right here, the vessel is being built. We have frames, and then we have these cast bronze floors. These cast bronze floors support engine beds, which you can see there, or engine logs, I guess, that are here and here. And that supports a cast bronze fuel tank, which you can see sitting here. The cast bronze fuel tank is about 130 gallons and also serves several other jobs. One of those jobs is that it is the engine room floor. The other job is that it's the engine mounts. And the last job is that it is the mounting face for a Nevins-built 1932 chain drive that takes care of both the reduction in the engine and a more than 20-inch vertical offset between the shaft coming out of the engine, which will eventually sit there, and the shaft that needs to run some 30 feet back and under the mast step. So if that sounds like a disaster, I've got better photos soon, but it added some complexity. So in order to access the frame heels in question, which had been determined to be rotty and gross, we had to pull the engine surround, the fuel tank, the chain drive, the shaft, and these 5 cast bronze floors. Now, the engine in Brilliant, we'll do this. The engine in Brilliant was put in the early 1980s. It's a Detroit 353. It's a great engine, but I haven't been able to get parts for it easily in some time. And if we were going to go through all the effort of pulling that engine out, we were probably not going to put that engine in. So repowering became part of the project. We expected to do frame heel repairs. We expected at this point that we would need to replace some of the floors as well. And we expected that we would replace planking to create, that got pulled off in order to create access for these frames. The engine and fuel tank and floors coming out would mean that we would be able to see the keel bolts for the first time in at that point it was 92 years. And so it just seemed prudent to replace keel bolts. If we were gonna replace keel bolts, we may as well remove and rebed the lead ballast keel so we could look at the wood keel. So that is what we went into the project expecting to do. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because it's a little weedy, but I think I would be foolish to skip over it. Obviously, we're a Coast Guard inspected vessel, and so there's a regulatory oversight component that was very present for this. And so this on the right here, which would be tough to read by anyone, but certainly today, is the first page of a repair proposal that would be amended 4 or 5 times as Discovery lent insight into how the project should be approached. But that was submitted initially to repair the 8 identified frames and eventually to repair significantly more than that. The repower was rolled into that. The rebedding of the keel was rolled into that as well. This diagram in the middle is worth pointing out. So this was included in our repair proposal, and we pretty much stuck with this for the frame repairs. We had as you guys saw in the photos, some deterioration of frames kind of here. And depending on what metal the frames were interacting with, sometimes that deterioration was higher. We basically would work up the frame until we got to something good, and then we'd cut a scarf out from that point up. We would scarf in a new section of white oak, either laminated or sawn, depending on the area that we were addressing. And then we would back, and this is where it gets interesting. I'll show you some actual photographs of it. We would back that scarf with bronze strapping in the areas, we'll say in the areas where the lead keel was sort of hanging off of that structure. The scarves were then mechanically backed with fastenings. So that felt like overkill, and we felt pretty confident in that. This was our back of napkin plan before we really got into it. Once we started really getting our heads down into the bilge a little bit more, working with the shipwrights who would be taking this on. So this is, as you can tell, more than 8 frames. The number will grow, but this also includes the keel bolts are highlighted here, and the floors are highlighted here. We initially just planned to do a replacement of all floors through which keel bolts passed. That was like a blanket starting statement. And we knew that we would find floors that were compromised either with rot or delignification. And we certainly did. So these floors up here were all compromised in a way that we were not initially expecting. And then we stuck our heads down there and said, gee, this is gonna get added. We spent about 18 months in advance of this project running around and trying to get our ducks in a row, which we did with moderate degrees of success. So one of the things that was on everybody's mind is that Brilliant is planked in 2-inch teak. It's old growth teak that is obviously dear. I think always, and particularly at that time, teak pricing was quite volatile if you could find it in these dimensions anyway. And so we had a quick haul in the spring of 2024 to pattern the expected planks that we would be thinking that we would replace. And then myself and Scott Gifford, who's insane, actually. That whole thing was nuts. You can maybe see it here. This is just merely interesting. These are all bowls of old growth teak. It was nuts. They must have had security, but I didn't see it. It was bonkers. Anyway, we were able to grab that in advance of the project starting, and that 2,000 board feet carried us mostly through. Now, a side note is that we had to buy it in boule form, so we had to buy a lot of waste, but that was simply the option we had. We worked with Rockport Marine on this project, and I'll address this right now, although I'm happy to discuss it more. I don't even want to say it's an elephant in the room, but we have a shipyard here in Mystic, and they specialize in wooden boat maintenance. But we found that when we bid the job out, and Mystic Seaport Museum did officially bid on it, there were a lot of challenges with staying here that were mitigated by going to Rockport. One of the challenges is that Mystic Seaport's Henry B. DuPont Preservation Shipyard had no availability until 2027, which was tough. I think we had sort of obligations to outside parties at that time that would have made this really tricky. The museum's shipyard here, I think, does wonderful work, and I love working with them, and their staff were part of the advisory effort on this. However, I think we would all agree that their specialty is larger timbered workboats, and this would have been a tricky pivot. We would have ended up doing the project outside, which is not an insurmountable challenge, but would have been a challenge for the timeline we were looking at. And then one thing that a couple things about Rockport Marine. One, they have a fab shop, a design team, painters, they have naval architects there, and we were able to kind of roll a lot of this into one project rather than having to sub out different elements of this. And it was really nice to sort of go home. They were this yard took care of the only other large project the vessel has had, which was a deck replacement about 20 years ago. And there was it was a nice feeling going there. And throughout the project was just, I couldn't have been happier with where we landed. Okay, so now we're gonna get to the pull the boat apart thing. We sailed up to Penobscot Bay in the fall of 2024. And these are pictures you've seen before, right? Rig gets pulled out of boat, boat gets yoinked out of water. That's pretty straightforward. I was very comfortable with this side of the process. This is where I started getting pretty twitchy. So the first step was to remove Brilliant from her 22,500 pound ballast keel. And they did that by taking sawzalls to the boat and getting access to the nuts on the keel bolts. I spent a lot of time like hovering around them, being like, do you have to use a sawzall? And they would say, yes, this is what you hired us to do. And then I'd calm down eventually. This was sort of the demo and discovery was also starting here. There were areas that we knew we were going to take apart, and so we didn't take them apart particularly carefully. As we were able to get a little bit of loosening on those keel bolt nuts, we started to see, and this was the goal, a little bit of gapping between the lead keel and the wood keel, just enough to get a blade in there and start cutting. Once it got spooky, we built a cradle. Maybe I should say that before it got spooky, we built a cradle underneath that lead keel and put a decent amount of weight on it so that there wasn't a bad moment. And we eventually lifted Brilliant off of her lead keel. This wasn't my favorite thing to do. I was glad that I was only bearing witness to it. A lot of people have asked, and so I included it in here, what was the condition of those keel bolts? They were great. They looked really awesome. And part of me is like disappointed by that, but actually that's not true, right? So it's nice to reset the clock on that material, but they held up tremendously well. There was a little bit of wear at sort of that fang surface between the wood keel and the floors. We saw a little bit of ringing, but it wasn't necked out the way that I will show you some other things we found. Yeah?
Were they Monel?
They were bronze.
Bronze.
There is a lot of Monel in her, as you may know, but these were bronze. Once her keel was off, it was like everything was easy. Not really, but everything was straightforward for a little while. We moved her into the shop. We started disassembling as much as we could the interior to create access. And we pulled the engine. The engine surround, and associated systems were removed with relative ease. And then we got into a bit of a pickle. Thankfully, we sort of knew it was coming. So this is our chain drive installed here, chain drive uninstalled and on its way up into heaven. And then here we have a fuel tank that the boat was built around. And so we sucked it up to the overhead and blocked it up, and everyone worked under it for a good while. We would eventually, there's photos of it in a little while, we would eventually media blast it and pressure test it before sort of putting it back into service. I shudder to think what would have happened if it didn't pass muster. That would have been a can of worms that would have really affected several things: timeline, budget, my sanity. All right. So we had loosely committed or endeavored to stick with an in-kind replacement where possible. In the frames are white oak, and the scarfs are also white oak, and that was an easy decision to make. In the not so shapely parts of the boat, this is kind of midships, we were able to use bell ends of white oak logs, and so they're just sawn frames. In the more shapely parts of the vessel here, and here's one of those frame heels being laid out. These are our laminations. This is the laminate of white oak. As you guys know, we already talked about it, the teak hull was replaced with teak. And then the floors, we kind of went around and around for a little while. In order to, we ended up moving to Purple Heart, away from white oak, and to Purple Heart in an effort to just do everything in single pieces rather than having to do a build up or a glue up. And that was a decision I think we're all pretty happy with, but that's a species change. It is also, incidentally, a weight change. White oak is lighter than Purple Heart. It all kind of worked out nicely. We took weights of everything going off and on throughout the whole project, and with the engine getting lighter and the floors getting heavier, I think we had a 50-pound difference at the end and weight moving down. So everyone was pretty pleased with that. All righty. So we're going to chat a little bit about the deterioration here. So the deterioration was most pronounced in areas that were wet and deep in the bilge, which is, sorry about that, expected, and also in areas where the diagonal bronze strapping inside of Brilliant's hull planking and outside of the frames came in contact with both hull planking and frames. And so here is a little example. You can even see actually in this photo a little bit of the burnout of the wood around here. I don't know if it's discernible to you guys, but we found in most of the drier sections of the hull was actually not particularly pronounced, and it was determined that it would be serviceable. But low in the bilge where things were wet, that's where we really saw that deterioration in both hull planking and frames. This is a weedy detail, but you guys might care about it. If you look in the NAVIC for wooden boats, which is like the Coast Guard sort of recommendation, as many of you I'm sure have dug through, it's not a particularly lengthy document, and it was published, I don't know, early 90s, 93 maybe. And they talk about scarf ratios at length. One of the things they talk about is that, you know, a scarf ratio of 12:1 gives you 100% theoretical replacement strength, and they give you a percentage as you kind of rack down to lower ratios. If we had used a 12:1 ratio here, we would have found ourselves really biting into, frankly, very nice hull and getting above the waterline. And so we elected to opt for an 8:1 ratio, which gives you about, I might misspeak here, I think 85% or so of sort of strength as far as the replacement goes. And then we built up that confidence by mechanically fastening those scarves, and also by backing, is it here? By backing our scarves with this bronze strapping. We were sort of additionally, our confidence was additionally bolstered by doing the Scantling math on Brilliant and confirming the degree to which the vessel was overbuilt. We found that the frame spacing was about 25% overkill. She has 25% more frames than she needs. And her frame size was about 15% bigger than it needed to be. I don't know that I would hang my hat on that math alone, but it was certainly nice to see in addition to that mechanical backup. The math for the floor timbers was similar, actually more so. And we'll look at those next. So her floors, as we mentioned, were replaced with Purple Heart. She's got these monsters through which keel bolts pass that are about, this is 6 inches across. These are all 3, which is about the same molded dimension as the frames are. We ended up replacing, I think I mentioned that we originally were gonna replace just out of hand the floors through which the keel bolts passed, and we knew that there might be some additions here. The floors through which the keel bolts pass, number 11, we ended up doing twice that when all was said and done. So we did 22 floors when the project was over. Now we get into the engine space where we have, of course, 5 cast bronze floors. I mentioned that we media blasted the fuel tank. We, of course, couldn't move the fuel tank out, so we had to tent the boat. That was someone's fun job, thankfully not mine. The bronze floors were removed 1 or 2 at a time to be media blasted, inspected, and thankfully all were determined to be serviceable and were put back in the vessel once the frames were replaced. Now, initially, the 6 frames in this area that were determined to be bad, no good, must be replaced were this one, and this one. But once we, I think I could, my size is smaller than most of the Coast Guard inspectors, and I think smaller than most of the shipwrights. And so all of a sudden we started shoving a smaller dimension shoulder down into the bilge, and we realized pretty quickly that we would be doing more frames. Okay, so that was all the planned stuff, and now we're gonna chat about increase in scope that was not expected. So I have found myself saying that I expected the sort of increase in scope in the neighborhood of what we were already planning on doing, right? So I expected, okay, we're gonna do frame replacements, we're probably gonna do more than we expect. Okay, we're doing floors, we'll probably do more than that. What I was not expecting, and we can chalk it up to me not ever having done this before, I was not expecting a total increase in scope at the whole other end of the boat. we hauled the vessel out, and Glenn Pease, who ran the project with Rockport Marine, said, Sarah, you have a leak in the deadwood. We're gonna have to get into that. And I said, Glenn, can we focus on the middle of the boat? And he said, well, we're gonna at least knock this stop water out right here. This was where the leak was, and take a look at it. And we said, fine. So we might have to drop the rudder. And I said, no, let's focus, right? And so we ended up in the shop before we started looking at the stop water. And we ended up having to drill it out because it turns out it was perforated by one of the deadwood bolts at the time of construction, which is, I would describe as a real bummer. So 2 months into the project, we moved Brilliant back outside, dropped the rudder, and stuck her in the shed again, which was sort of an expensive comment of mine in the beginning, but I'll take it. No one said I told you so, and they really could have. We ended up dropping the rudder and pulling out all of the bolts in what I find myself describing as a fan-shaped bolting arrangement. And so I'll show a line drawing in a little bit that shows this a little bit better, but you can maybe see the chalk lines here. There's like 6 or 8 that go up the stern post and several that go through the deadwood and into the keel. All of them were in bad shape. The water had traveled pretty significantly along those seams. It had a 92-year little voyage inside the deadwood and had been cutting off these bolts. I fear I have a worse picture that I was too sheepish to put here because of live streams, but these were not in great shape, and I was really happy to replace them. This also provided motivation for us to take a look at some of the 4-foot bolting as well, and we were able to replace that as well. This was something where, unlike the keel bolts, which looked great, this felt so justified in the effort and even the headache of having to move the vessel outside and back in, which again, bummer, was so well worth it. It was a really sobering thing to find, and so not the point of this project. It was just incidentally really good to get. We're gonna chat about the repower for a minute, and I fear, I went back and forth about how to describe all of this, so bear with me, I'm gonna do my best. The repower became quite a puzzle for us. We found ourselves sort of having to marry a new engine, a new tech to an old and complex and historic driveline. So just the big picture, and maybe I'll back up for a moment. Walter Barnum, who had this vessel commissioned, wanted a quiet cockpit, and he was very interested in weight being centered both fore and aft and starboard port, which is why the fuel tank is centerlined, and it's why the engine is so far forward. So you'll see here that this is the main mast, and I'll tell you the foremast is there, and that's our engine sitting on top of a fuel tank. The little stub shaft comes out, our chain drive drops everything down, and then the shaft line runs under the mast step all the way back some 30 plus feet. It is cool. It's bonkers. It was a complex sort of circular conversation for several months, limited by a number of factors. Just to give you guys, I'll go forward and then back again, just to give you guys a little bit more background here, just so you can get your head around it. This is the engineered drawing of the chain drive. It's a couple sprockets and a tensioning shoe made of lignum vitae, that is mounted onto the aft side of the fuel tank. This is the drawing from Nevins of that cast bronze fuel tank. Evidently, it took them 3 tries to get it right. I've just heard that. And then this is that shaft run that we saw in the other drawing, but it's just a little blown up. So that's our deal there. This does show, though, and it's worth noting that the shaft coming out of the chain drive is in 3 pieces. So there's a little stubby shaft that comes to a flex coupler, a forward section of shaft, a thrust bearing randomly, and then an after section of shaft. So we were limited by a number of things. Space was one of them, and then I held on to a pipe dream for a long time that maybe we would not have to mess with the chain drive, and I held on to that probably longer than I should have. But I was concerned about how the regulatory environment would treat something as unusual as this, and how slow this, or how the timeline would be affected by having to go through something like MSC. The folks at JMS Naval Architects, who are just down in Noank and were really generous with their time on this project, said, well, Sarah, if you're gonna not redo the chain drive, at least let us do the math and make sure it's robust enough to handle this. And that was a pretty reasonable thing to do, particularly because I was hopeful that we could put a slightly bigger engine into Brilliant. So she's been running with a Detroit 353, which pushes out, on paper, it's an 80 horsepower engine at 2,800 RPMs. I've never seen Brilliant run at more than 2,200 RPMs with that setup. It was an underpowered vessel. She had a deeply overpitched prop, which at least made her maneuverable, but I was using like 4.5 knots for planning speeds, which is a little rough. So we were eager to put a little bit more horsepower into the boat. Yanmar's 4JH engine comes in a 110 and an 80, and so we were playing with that and its footprint work. There were a lot of things checking boxes on that. JMS, the Naval Architects, looked at the chain drive and said, bad news, Sarah, it's definitely not robust enough for the 110. In fact, it's actually really on the edge for the 80. And so we were in a position where there was not a solution where we couldn't find ourselves redoing the chain drive. The chain drive came out, and this is sort of like the actual, and we were able to bring on a couple of different people who basically remade the guts of it, to say it sort of inelegantly. And they took an opportunity to deepen the reduction in that chain drive. Remember, it took care of actually all of the reduction for the Detroit. Now it takes care of most of the reduction for the Yanmar. We found ourselves in a position of trickiness as well, because most of the sort of diesels on the market these days, maybe I don't want to say most, but certainly the ones we were considering operated at 3,200 RPMs instead of the 28 that is on paper for the Detroit. And so we were looking at a faster in speed and a concern about heat buildup in that chain drive. We ended up putting a Yanmar in, put a marine gear that took care of some of the reduction, so at least the in speed for that chain drive was in a similar ballpark to the old configuration. We found ourselves having to look at the rest of the line as we were increasing both horsepower and torque. The shaft, the 3 shafts were all different pieces, some of them of unknown alloys, and so there was a lot of sort of having to reset materials on that. We ended up replacing the full shaft line with Aquamet 22, which was able to stay in the same dimension as the old shaft with a more robust sort of working load, I guess is how I would say that. We also, with a bigger engine, needed a bigger propeller, but we're not willing to cut an aperture bigger, and so Lifehack is add a blade. And so we went from a 3-blade Luke feathering propeller to a 4-blade Vari prop, V-A-R-I, which so far we like a lot. Is it gonna do it? Okay, great. Obviously, the new engine's mounting pattern was different, and so the folks at Rockport Marine made this behemoth of a engine mount that tied in with the bolting pattern on the fuel tank, which is, of course, where we bolted the engine to. And so there was a lot of in and out, and we were happy with the ultimate install, which is tucked into the side here. While all of the configuring and gazintering was going on with the repower, the shipwrights had started doing a really fine job closing the hull up. We left a little bit of access so that we could land the keel back in place and get access to the top of those keel bolts. But this part of the project went really quickly, as you can imagine, compared to so much of the nitty-gritty. Now, we had initially really hoped to replace full planks with full planks. And I think if we had stayed within the scope that we had anticipated, that would have been the case. This will come as a surprise to none of you, but we did find rot under the galley and one of the heads. And so we found ourselves doing a couple of scarf repairs in those areas rather than doing full plank replacements there. And we'll have a couple of other, yeah, there's another photo. This is the head in question. So those were just some scarf repairs. That's a butt, and then that's a scarf there. You can see, actually, I think this is interesting. You can see where the new frame and scarfs went up to on some of those longer ones. You can see that there, and then some of these are the scarfs midships. Some glorious foresight happened, and the vessel was blocked pretty high for this project, and we were actually able to bring the keel in and jack it up into place. The keel, I think I mentioned this, is 22,500 pounds. It's like a third of the weight of the vessel, and we were able to, I'm saying we, these guys were able to jack this up and used a bunch of pneumatic airbags and had a day where they, quote, beat themselves up, but they got it in place, and we were really pleased to not have to move the vessel back outside again for that. This is Tim, who is one of the shipwrights on this project, humoring me for our whiskey plank day with a little Basil Hayden nice time. The caulking went really smoothly. The shipwrights were like everybody's favorite because they just were moving right along as we were all scratching our heads about repower throughout this process. This was May, I think I wrote it down. May 28th, we came out of the shed, and our hope was to sacrifice a fall, a winter, and a spring and maintain the full teen sail training season. And so the clock was really starting to feel fast at this time. And I think maybe all of these projects use the last 30 seconds and the last 5 cents of both time and money. And this was not any different. So we pulled the boat out of the shed and started furiously installing things. So at this point we had, the engine was in, but the chain drive was not, the shaft was not, obviously the propeller and the rudder were not on. The rig was still in the attic. Much of the pieces of the boat were still here in Mystic, being worked on by our crew. And so we had a really whirlwind month. The thrust bearing is being installed on the right here. It's a monster that sits on a pretty sizably fabricated sort of structure that's bolted into floors there. And our propeller was going on as well. We launched only a couple days later, June 3rd, we went into the water. And my hope and dream was to be sailing with kids like the first week of July. So we were really pushing it. I don't think that this is actually like the most professional photo to include, but it made me laugh. So this was my Instagram story in the middle of uprig. And it said, "This has been diabolical. 6 days ago, Brilliant came out of the shed. 14 days ago, the mast came outside. 10 days ago, we launched. 7 days ago, we stepped the mast. 4 days ago, we fired up the engine for the first time. 3 days ago, we got underway. 4 sea trials. Today, we went out with the Coast Guard, motored around, went sailing, and got the green light for the last 8 months of work. I'm going to take a day off." So it was felt like a huge lift from so many people, and it was just very exciting. We sailed home over 3 days. It was uneventful, which is exactly what you would like after a project like this. It was funny, you do your engine checks every hour, maybe you do a boat check every hour. We did a walk around with your thermometer check on the driveline every 20 minutes or so, because everybody, we did sea trials and we went out for a few hours, but this was a push. And I think we were all looking at a system that had not really been proven other than on paper. And it was just really rewarding to see it all come together like this. We had a gaggle of folks join us, past crew, former, current crew. One of the shipwrights who had been the mate on Brilliant came and joined us, and it was just a real treat. We got home on June 27th, in time for the Wooden Boat Show, and in time for our Coast Guard inspection the following Monday, and in time to go out with students. And I was tremendously honored. The Wooden Boat Show gave us Best in Show for a professionally maintained vessel. And they made it very clear that that was to honor both the work that had been done, but also to sort of like hat tip the way that this boat has been maintained in such a forward-thinking way by an organization that might not have done that. So it was a huge lift, and I'm grateful for a huge group of people. I wanted to show you this. We have done our best to keep thoughtful record of this project, both because the Coast Guard wants it and also because Brilliant is an accessioned vessel in the collection here. And this is part of that. So this is done on a computer version of our back of napkin crayon drawing. And it shows the work that was done. So the green are all of the frames that saw bronze strapping, which is all of these ones here and some of the ones on the port side. The yellow are frames that got what we'll call it's like a smaller repair. It's not a structural repair. It's really just a renewal of the end grain. It was not a ratioed scarf. It was not backed with bronze strapping. And then we saw, we tried to delineate where things got sawn frame replacements and laminated frame replacements. And in a couple of weird places, laminated graving pieces, because that was what could fit. We also did our best to lock in all of the work that had been done centerline, and I fear you can't read this, but it's boring. I said I would show you that fan-shaped bolting arrangement of the deadwood. That's what I mean there. And so all of that was renewed. The blue is indicating all the floors that were replaced. The orange is our keel bolts that were dropped in. Most of these are doubled and angled keel bolts, with the exception of, I believe, the first two, the forward two. And then I also mentioned that finding these bolts in the shape we found them in encouraged us to investigate up here, and we were happy to see replacement there as well. We incidentally replaced the mast step. We were jacking it up to get a floor out, and we cracked it. So the mast step is now Purple Heart as well. It's very pretty. We're very excited. But this is largely the big picture of what we were able to do here. This past summer, we started sailing with kids again. We, I think, did one fewer trip than we would have in a normal season. However, that was planned. We didn't cancel anything, which felt really big. So this is just a smattering of feel-good sail training photos. And then this fall, we did everything we normally do. It's back to our normal cadence of pull the boat apart, pull the rig out, cover the boat, bring our volunteers in, take apart winches, varnish blocks. And it is nice to be back into that sort of familiar rhythm. And it's really nice to have the boat like right here, 10 minutes from where we all live, and not going up to Maine every 2 weeks or so for 10 months. So I thank you guys so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know how I did on time. Okay. Yeah. Also bronze. Yep. Not Monel. Because we could get it. Yeah, it was like most of it. We ended up essentially, I don't want to say fabricating it. We just bought rod, and we were able to just cut threads on one side, and it worked out well. I don't really think we considered Monel for that. Frankly, the bronze lasted 92 years. And we felt pretty confident that was a choice that was worth repeating. Right, yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, we did. Yeah, absolutely. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I got exposed to this alkali delignification of wood.
Yeah.
And on my boat, it was caused by too much zinc. And I wondered, did they do a complete electrolytical survey?
It's a really good question.
There's so much bronze, and I wondered if there was a zinc imbalance.
So the short answer is I don't think it's too much zinc, because she doesn't have very much on, but that's anecdotal. The longer answer is there was a study done to her in, I should know this, 2008. Ed McClave came in and did his Ed McClave thing. And I would like to repeat it, but we have not yet. So I'm interested to know what that dock is like. We have a lot of transient, there are some variables that are not unfortunately controllable, but it is on, I will say it's on the shorter term list, but it hasn't been addressed yet.
Did you unbond?
It was unbonded long before me. Okay. Yeah. But there was a history of that. I haven't seen, this is also anecdotal, I have not seen that delignification progress in my time with the boat, which is 5 years, right? Yeah. And when I spoke with Nick Alley, who was with the boat for maybe 7 or 8 before me, he didn't think that it had progressed in his time. We also had like a sort of Ed McClave recommended vinegar and baking soda treatment that we would do to it periodically to try to mitigate any progression. I think all of that is sort of, I fear, a little anecdotal, but that's what I have on that. Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
How's it with the variable prop and the RPMs and all that?
It's been fine, and I will say that prop is it's variable or it's adjustable, right? So I can't do anything from the deck. A discerning person with an Allen key can. And so one thing that I thought was funny, maybe you guys will, was that one of the sort of advertising avenues that the VariProp folks use is that they say, we'll get rid of prop walk entirely. And I was like, don't do that. That's how I put it on the dock, right? So, but there is like an ability to have a different pitch going in reverse versus forward, which whatever, but cool. I think I like it. I will say I felt like I spent this season like relearning how to drive the boat, and we do not walk quite as enthusiastically, which makes sense. I really think George just said if I have to be underpowered, at least I'll be maneuverable and just overpitch the hell out of the prop, which was part of the reason we weren't even in the neighborhood of max of operating RPMs with that Detroit.
So what is your RPM and cruising speed on it?
Okay, I wondered if I should tell you this. Our cruising speed now is like an easy 6.5 or so. That's without really trying that hard. When we went out for sea trials with Billings, who were the folks that put that package together for us, we were all like a little, I didn't mention this, that shaft line is really long. The exhaust run is also, it's as long. And with the Detroit, it was a wet exhaust. There was a significant back pressure issue that was mostly mitigated by not asking it to go backwards. We would lose the engine in reverse with some frequency, and getting it started again required draining the exhaust. It was not ideal. Thank you. It's my favorite. We also, I don't know if you know this, we're like way up a river and there's bridges. Anyway, there was a question about back pressure with the Yanmar, which was going to be significantly less enthusiastic about that, right? It would be a little bit more of a picky engine. And if we wanted the warranty to be signed off on, we needed to like meet certain metrics. We made use of that, or one of the ways we sorted that out was by stripping the exhaust almost immediately. So that long exhaust run was dry and cool, but dry. When we went through with the folks at Billings, our max speed at 3,200 was 10.5 knots, which was faster than I have ever gone. That's actually not true, but it was faster than I wanted to go. On Brilliant, but it was neat to see, and all of the numbers came out happy, particularly back pressure, which was 6.5 or so. Yeah. 18, 20. They really want me to be at 25, but then we go places too fast. Also, we sail, so I will say this is an interesting thing with the Detroit. If we wanted to get anywhere, we had to sail, and now we actually sometimes aren't winning with sailing, which is like requiring a little bit of discipline for me. Yeah, yeah.
Why don't you have the back pressure problem anymore?
Because we strip the water out of the exhaust almost right away.
So how is it cooled?
It's still cooled wet, so it's still a wet exhaust. You still are pulling seawater in, running it through as you normally would, except instead of there's a 30-foot run that used to be air and water. Before anything has to go uphill, there's a big water lift muffler that pulls the water out and sends it out of a different through hole. Yeah. We went with the 110. Yeah, sorry about that. I meant to say that. Yeah, we went with the 110. We were very happy with that. It's interesting. The 80 was a nice fallback, except the power curves are very different between the Detroit and the Yanmar, and it's really not actually, it would have been a bummer to kind of lower. Yeah.
What does the boat weigh and what size prop is it?
It's a 28-inch 4-blade VariProp, and we weigh about 100,000 pounds. Maybe it's 105, something like that. 50 tons. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
How did you do budget-wise?
About $1 million.
Is
Okay, so that's a good question. I got great advice about how much contingency for both time and money to put into this, and we did not go over budget, which was like a miracle from the Lord. We hit it, let me be very clear, we very much hit it. I think it was 1.01, and that was including like me renting an apartment up that, there was like, that wasn't the bill from the yard, but that was like all told about what we hit, yeah. We also went into this project with most of that money in hand, and the money we didn't have in hand was pledged. And I don't know, this is a lucky boat. I mean, it's a lucky boat, and the people who are on it are lucky. I was floored by it, totally. The Bodmans, who were a family that owned the vessel for a while, came and were so supportive and so excited. There were huge. There's been significant support for the vessel over the years that has moved into restricted funding here at the museum, and so those were able to be fully cashed in. To be clear, but it's been huge. I mean, I have no idea how we kind of lucked out like that, other than people working on this for decades beforehand. Yeah. Okay, thank you guys. To you, but I don't know how to turn it on.
Sarah. All right.
Thank you so much. This is so awesome. I didn't need to run away. Oh, this is so fun. I was panicked that I took my next